The Rebel Capitalist Show.
People that hear you talk about inflation, though, Peter, we get fixated on consumer price inflation or maybe the dollar going down against other currencies. But they would say, well, Peter, isn't this a good argument to buy the broad S&P? Because if prices are going up, isn't the market going to double, triple, and don't I want to be a part of that? So how would you respond to that?
Well, I think it's a good argument to get out of currency, out of U.S. dollars. I think it's a very good argument to get out of bonds, which are simply dollars to be paid to you at a later date, and so you can lose even more in bonds than in cash. And if the only three choices I had were cash, bonds, and the S&P, then yeah, I guess I would go for the S&P because at least it represents actual businesses, right. And the profit potential of those businesses and their tangible assets,
or at least it used to.
but of course, the regulatory and tax environment is going to become increasingly hostile towards those businesses. But I think that given the fact that we have alternatives like, precious metals as a store of value and foreign stocks, to the extent you want to be an owner of companies and participate in their growth and their dividends, I think that you have much better real returns, and that's what counts. The Zimbabwe stock market went way up, right? It was, during the hyperinflation, it was the best performing stock market in in Zimbabwe dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't a very good performer in euros or US dollars.
Purchasing power, right?
Yeah, if you measured the Zimbabwe stocks in terms of gold, somebody in Zimbabwe did a lot better just having an ounce of gold in a shoebox than buying their stock market. And I think the same thing will be true for Americans. I think if Americans simply buy some gold and hold on to it, in real terms, they'll do better than buying the S&P. And that is the case. Had you bought the S&P in 1999, 2000, and somebody else bought gold, the person who bought gold at that time and still owns it has more money, even if you factor in the dividends, than the person who bought the S&P. And I think that's going to continue. I think the S&P is going to lose a lot of value. But I don't want to put all my money in gold. I want to have productive assets. I want to get dividends. I want more potential than just having metal that just preserves its value. But there are real investment opportunities outside the United States that I think will outperform gold. But I don't think the S&P will, because A, it's starting from such an overvalued level, but B, we have such a horrific economic environment that we're going to have to live through. It's going to get so much worse before it hopefully one day gets better.
Yeah, on that note, I did a video the other day where I looked at a chart of government spending as a percentage of GDP. And if you look prior to the Civil War, it was like 2%, 3%. And now, and every time it spikes, whether it was the Civil War, World War I, World War II, it comes down to a level much higher than it was prior to the spike. And of course, now we've got a huge spike due to the coronavirus. So, but I did some back of the napkin math because my chart went to 2018. And now, from my calculations, government spending is about 57% of GDP. Prior to the coronavirus, it was about 45%. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that really quick.
Yeah, they constantly reset the bar. They have an emergency, even if they create the emergency themselves, but sometimes it's legitimate, like the Second World War. And because of that emergency, they ramp up government spending. And back then, at least, they ramped up taxes to pay for it. Like we got the victory tax, the withholding tax to fight the Second World War. But when the war is over, they never surrender a lot of their wartime powers, a lot of their extra taxes and extra money. If they stop spending it on the war, but they just figure out something else to spend it on. And so that, yeah, we're never going to go back to where we were. Look at the financial crisis. The budget deficits were a couple $100 billion a year, and then they ran up to over $1 trillion. They never got back down anywhere near where they were before the financial crisis. They bottomed out at maybe $700-800 billion, and that was the official budget deficit. I don't think we had a single year following the 2008 financial crisis where the national debt didn't go up at least $1 trillion.
Yeah. Explain to people what it means if we get closer and closer to 100% of GDP being a result of government spending.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not even a real economy. I mean, it's just government doesn't create anything, right?
Right.
Government doesn't produce the goods and services that we consume. It's a drag on the economy. Government has to be supported. So anything the government spends, it needs to extract from the economy before it can spend it.
Yeah, said another way, if government spending is 57% of GDP, then the private sector economic output is only 43%. And as you get closer to 100%, of course, the private sector is doing less and less and less. And that's where you just go straight to central planning, socialism, communism, really whatever you want to call it.
And then you have nothing because, see, I mean, if you go back and look at these economies, like go back and look at the old Soviet Union, right? Nobody actually had anything, right? Nobody was really unemployed because everybody had a government job, but nobody actually produced anything on the job. And so there was nothing to buy with your government paycheck. I mean, maybe they had something and there was some bread that they figured out how to bake, and you'd have to wait in line for 4 or 5 hours to get a loaf. And it was probably stale, but it was all you could get.
Right.
Because when the government is in charge of the economy, there is no economy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no production. You need free market forces. You need supply and demand. You need profit motive. You need all these other markets to function to allocate resources. And nobody is smart enough to figure out how to do it.
Yeah,
but that is the direction we're headed. Meanwhile, we're conditioning the public that, hey, yeah, I used to have this rotten job, and I used to have to, go in traffic in the morning, get up early. I had to, shower, get dressed. If you're a woman, I had to put on my makeup. I had to do my hair. It took me an hour or two just to get ready for work. Nobody paid me for that. Then I had a long drive in traffic, or I got into a train and I spent 8 hours at a job I didn't like. And then I had to come back and I lost the whole day. And you know what? Now I don't have to do any of that. I could just stay at home and I'm making even more money.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
Hey, this is great. Life is great, right? So we've created this COVID gravy train that nobody wants to end, right?
Yeah.
Because, hey, we can all have this free money. What's the point of working when you can just stay home and get paid?
Yeah, and talking about UBI and more central planning, I think that's a great transition. I know you're limited on time here, but what do you think about a central bank digital currency?
Well, I'm opposed to anything that gives the government more control over our lives. And that's what that would do. I mean, the government would love, they would love to eliminate cash, because if I buy something, I give somebody a $20 bill, the government doesn't know about that transaction. But if I'm forced to pay them with some digital dollar, they know exactly what I bought and who I bought it from. They can track my every move. And the problem is, people might think, well, what difference does it make if the government knows what you do? Well, when the government is honest, I guess it doesn't really make a difference. But what happens when the government becomes corrupt, right? What happens when the government is violating the law and now targeting their political enemies? And it's easier to do that when they know everything you're doing and everybody you're meeting with and everybody you're talking with, and of course, if they want to do this negative interest rate stuff, to the extent that you could take the cash out of the bank, well, you don't have to pay the negative interest. But if you don't have any cash to withdraw, they can just keep subtracting, money out of your digital wallet until you're forced to go and spend it before it's all gone. So it lets the government micromanage the economy more. It lets them pry into your affairs more. And again, this is why, or one of the reasons, I do not like all these anti-money laundering laws, not because I want to make it easier for terrorists. I don't. But I recognize that these laws that are meant to track terrorists now will be used to trap law-abiding Americans, patriotic Americans, who get labeled as terrorists by a corrupt government. Remember, right? If government gets corrupt and then you want to have a revolution, you want to fight off that corruption, then you're the enemy, right? And now the government can use all this power against you. So you give them the power, when they're honest, and then they get the power and then they abuse that power. So that's why you never want to surrender the power to government in the first place. I mean, that's why, we have a history, all these examples. Do not give up some liberty or safety. Don't give up your rights for some comfort or some safety, right? Because you're going to end up losing both.